Boca Chica wasn't known for subtlety. It was the kind of place where the future screamed from every launch pad, where metal birds defied gravity and people spoke in numbers and rocket fuel. But on this particular morning, the wind off the Gulf carried with it something quieter, something heavier. Elon Musk felt at the moment his foot snagged on a jutting edge of rust. He stopped mid-stride, the desert sun casting a long shadow behind him, making him look more like a myth than a man. A faint crunch followed. Looking down, he saw the offender, a small, rusted screw embedded right into the rubber sole of his sneaker. He bent down with a frown that tugged the corners of his mouth and pried it loose. Not with frustration, but with thought. Musk had a peculiar relationship with the mundane. He believed that small things, poorly placed screws, forgotten rivets, the unnoticed hiccups in a machine, were the seeds of collapse or genius. Today, however, the screw wasn't the real interruption. It was what happened when he looked up. Just across the road, near a patch of stubborn cactus and faded yellow gravel, a boy was crouched, knees pulled to his chest, rocking gently. He couldn't have been more than 19. His hair was short and messy, like he'd slept in too many uncomfortable places. His clothes were dusty and didn't belong to this decade. But it was his hands, clutching a crumpled note like it was oxygen, and his eyes, red-rimmed and vacant, that made Elon's breath catch. For a moment, time dropped a gear. The usual noise of Boca Chica, tool clanks, engines humming, distant conversations layered in tech jargon, seemed to mute itself. A plane passed overhead, indifferent, carving a white scar across the blue sky. Elon took a step forward, then another. Something about the boy tugged at him in a way no algorithm could compute. He didn't believe in fate, not exactly, but he did believe in patterns. This, whatever this was, felt like an anomaly in the fabric. And anomalies to Elon were invitations. He stopped a few feet away, giving the boy space, but making his presence clear. "Hey," Elon said, not unkindly. The boy didn't move. "You okay?" he tried again. This time, the boy blinked slowly, as if the voice had traveled through layers of fog to reach him. His mouth opened slightly. No sound. Then he extended the crumpled piece of paper with trembling fingers. Elon didn't reach for it at first. He knelt down slowly, balancing on the balls of his feet, eyes level with the boy's. Up close, he could see the note was in another language. The letters curled in delicate, unfamiliar strokes, definitely not English or Spanish. Maybe Mandarin? Korean? Elon wasn't sure. But the paper was worn, its edges soft like old fabric. There was a small flower drawn in the corner, almost childlike. "What's your name?" Elon asked, softer this time. No answer. The boy just stared past him, into some far-off place Elon couldn't follow. Elon sat down, cross-legged, letting the gravel dig into his jeans. A few cars passed behind them, slowing slightly as drivers recognized him, but kept moving. He didn't care. Let them stare. Minutes passed. The sun crept higher. The wind lifted the edge of the note slightly, revealing a smudge of ink on the back, maybe a fingerprint, maybe a tear. Finally, the boy whispered something. It was a single word. Elon leaned in. "Gene." He nodded. "Okay, Gene. I'm Elon." The boy gave a faint nod. His fingers tightened on the paper, then loosened. They sat in silence for a while longer. Elon wasn't in a hurry. Rocket launches could wait. Meetings could be rescheduled. Whatever this was, it was more important. He didn't know why yet, but he'd learned to trust that small, irritating itch in his brain when something didn't make sense. After a while, Gene lifted his head and scanned the horizon, as if confirming the world hadn't ended. Then he looked at Elon properly for the first time, eyes wide and frightened. "Where am I?" he asked, voice broken and accented. "You're in Texas," Elon replied. "Boca Chica, near the coast." Gene frowned, the word Texas rolling around in his head like a marble in a bowl. I didn't mean to come here." "Where did you mean to go?" Gene didn't answer. Instead, he held out the note again. This time, Elon took it. The paper was old. A soft yellowing suggested it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. There were 3 lines of text. A name, perhaps. An address. Elon could make out one thing, a date. It was from 3 months ago. He folded it back carefully and handed it over. "Come on," he said, standing up and brushing gravel from his pants. "Let's get you something to eat. You look like you've been running on fumes." Gene hesitated, then took his hand. As they walked toward the road together, Elon's mind was already spinning, calculating, triangulating, reaching for meaning in the mystery. He didn't have a plan. Not yet. But something told him Jin's story was going to be bigger than just a lost boy on a dusty road. Something had cracked open, and Elon Musk was never one to walk away from a mystery. If you're still here, it's probably because this story got under your skin a little, and that's exactly where the best stories belong. So if you want to see where this goes, consider liking the video and hitting subscribe. Not because everyone says that, but because you might be the kind of person who knows a real story when you see it. Let's keep unraveling it together. Elon Musk had faced failures that cost millions, rockets that disintegrated mid-air, and skepticism from some of the brightest minds in science. But never had he felt so utterly incapable as he did standing in the security vestibule of SpaceX, trying to bridge the growing void between himself and the trembling young man now identified only by a name written in a language he couldn't read. Gene, or rather Nurzhan, as the Kazakh passport confirmed, stood awkwardly beside him, his hands gripping the straps of a worn canvas backpack as if they were the last thing tethering him to this world. Elon could feel the stares from the guards behind the bulletproof glass, their confusion evident. A billionaire walking in from the desert with a stranger who didn't speak the language or have a last name anyone could pronounce. It wasn't protocol. But Elon waved them off with a look. Inside the admin wing, he asked for a translator. The AI-based ones, of course. The most advanced models, trained in hundreds of dialects, even rare ones from the steppes of Central Asia. A sleek white pod activated on the table between them, its holographic interface scanning Nurzhan's voice as he repeated the same desperate phrase again and again. "Kaida mama, kaida mamas, kaida mamas." The device sputtered, paused, and then output in tinny English, "Where mother?" Elon froze. The simple translation stripped the phrase of its tremble, of its tears, but the weight remained. Nurzhan's eyes filled again, not with panic, but with something older. Grief. Not the kind that crashes like a wave, but the kind that lingers, scratching just below the skin. "Your mother," Elon repeated softly. "You're looking for your mother." Nurzhan nodded with such urgency, it looked painful. Then he fumbled through his backpack, pulling out a few tightly wrapped items, everything he had, it seemed. There were no clothes, no money. Just a black and white photograph, bent at the corners, showing a woman with almond-shaped eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was tied in a long braid that rested on her shoulder. She looked to be in her 30s, and there was something dignified in her expression, like someone who'd lived too many lives in too few years. Alongside the photo was a sheet of yellowed newsprint, an article written in Russian. Elon recognized the Cyrillic alphabet, but couldn't parse the headline. A professional translator might make more sense of it, but it was Sunday, and no one was picking up their phones. Still, the image printed in the paper was unmistakably the same woman from the photograph, this time in color, standing on a stage, smiling under a banner with words Elon couldn't understand. Was she famous? A teacher? A politician? Finally, there was the slip of paper with an address. It was written in careful handwriting, each letter slightly slanted. The zip code began with 77, Houston. Elon leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes roam across the fragments of Nurzhan's life. His instinct told him this wasn't random. Too much about the boy's arrival, his silence, his trembling, his determination, felt deliberate. It wasn't every day that a young man from Kazakhstan showed up in South Texas, clutching evidence of a woman who might no longer be alive. Did she come here? Elon asked, pointing at the United States in a map on the wall. Your mother, did she come to America? Nurzhan nodded, then hesitated. He reached again for the paper and pointed insistently to the Houston address, then to the photograph, then finally to himself. It was like watching a jigsaw puzzle build itself, one painful gesture at a time. Elon didn't speak. He stood, tapped his phone, and called for Steve, one of his most trusted logistics leads. Within minutes, a private car had been summoned, and Elon told security not to bother with the formalities. Nurzhan wasn't a threat. He was someone who needed help, and that was all the reason Elon needed. As they exited the building, the wind had picked up, pushing loose sand across the parking lot like thin sheets of glass. Nurzhan clutched his backpack to his chest as they walked toward the car. The driver opened the door, and Elon gestured for the boy to get in first. Once inside, Elon turned toward him, speaking slowly. "We're going to Houston," he said, "to find her." Nurzhan didn't answer, but his eyes softened. His grip loosened on the photo, and he rested his head briefly against the window, watching the launch towers shrink behind them as they drove away. The road stretched long and flat through Texas. Telephone wires marched in silence beside them. Elon remained quiet for most of the trip, glancing now and then at Nurzhan, who had fallen asleep in the back seat, the photograph still clutched in his hand. For a moment, Elon considered the absurdity of it all. He had canceled meetings, ignored engineers, walked away from billions in orbit, all because of a stranger with no voice and a mystery wrapped in foreign words. But something inside him knew this was the kind of detour that mattered. Not every story that changes the world starts with a grand idea. Some start with a broken sentence, a torn photograph, and the strange certainty that you're exactly where you're meant to be. As Houston's skyline began to shimmer in the distance, Elon leaned forward. "Take us to this address," he told the driver, handing him the folded paper. "Let's see where it leads." By the time they arrived at the Houston complex, the sun had begun to sink into the horizon, spilling golden light across the skyline and coating the glass buildings with a surreal glow. Elon barely noticed. His thoughts were racing, fragments of emotion and speculation colliding in the silence of the car. Nurzhan sat next to him, staring down at the photograph in his hands. He hadn't spoken since they left Boca Chica, and Elon hadn't pressed him. The time for questions would come. Waiting for them at the side entrance of the SpaceX field office in Houston was Camila, the company's top-tier translator. A 30-something woman with sharp intuition and a calming presence, she greeted Elon with a respectful nod but turned her full attention to Nurzhan the moment she saw him. She didn't need words to see the weight he was carrying. She simply gave him a soft, warm smile and said, "Vamos con calma." Inside the conference room, Elon laid the newspaper, photograph, and handwritten address out across the polished table like puzzle pieces. Camila took a seat beside Nurzhan, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair but didn't pull away. Her tone was gentle, her body language relaxed as she spoke to him in Russian at first, then switched to bits of Kazakh. Nurzhan blinked, surprised, and responded cautiously. The exchange was slow, deliberate. Elon watched without interrupting. Camila's eyebrows furrowed as she listened, and at one point she reached across the table, placing her hand lightly over Nurzhan's. When she finally turned back to Elon, her expression had changed. Less professional now, more human. There was something trembling beneath the surface of her usually composed face. "His name is Nurzhan, like the passport says," she began quietly. "He's from a small village near the border of Kazakhstan and Russia. He came here searching for a woman named Rosa, his mother's cousin. The address was all he had." Elon nodded slowly. "And the article?" Camila exhaled. "That is about his girlfriend. Her name was Amina." Nurzhan flinched slightly at the name, clutching the photo tighter. "They were in a field one evening," Camila continued. "Just the two of them. He was going to propose. He had the ring in his pocket." Her voice caught for a moment, then steadied. But before he could, a package fell from the sky. Elon leaned forward. "A package?" She nodded. It was a drug drop. Local traffickers being chased by police dropped their cargo from a small plane, trying to dump the evidence mid-flight. The package hit Amina. Directly. Instantly fatal. The room went silent. Elon's mind grasped at the absurdity of it. of a human life taken not by war or disease or accident, but by the reckless trajectory of a bag full of poison meant for strangers. It didn't even sound real, but the hollow in Nurzhan's eyes made it undeniable. They tried to cover it up, Camila said softly. Officials said it was an accident, with no one to blame. But the village knew, and Nurzhan he broke. He says he couldn't stay there, not with the memory. He remembered Rosa from when he was little. She used to send letters. So he came here, alone. Elon rubbed his hand over his face, stunned into silence. Of all the chaos he had encountered in life, lawsuits, explosions, betrayals, this was different. It wasn't random. It was unjust, cruel in a way that didn't impute. And somehow, it had landed at his feet. He barely had enough money to get here, Camila added. Most of it was used just getting to the airport. He walked for hours once he landed, slept in a bus station. He kept the photos safe the whole time. They all looked at Nurzhan. He wasn't crying. His grief had already hardened into something quieter, something scarred. He met Elon's gaze, and though no words passed between them, the message was clear. I don't know what to do. I just don't want to be alone. Elon stood. We'll find Rosa. Camila blinked. You're serious? I don't know if she's even still alive, Elon admitted. But we're not leaving it at this. He picked up the paper with the Houston address and tapped it. Start here. See if she ever lived at this location. Get public records. Call neighbors. Knock on doors if we have to. If she's in the country, I'll find her. Camila nodded, already pulling her tablet from her bag. What about him? She asked, glancing at Nurzhan. Elon looked at the boy. He's staying with me. We'll figure it out. For the first time, a tiny flicker of something resembling hope sparked behind Nurzhan's tired eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood tone, and in Elon's voice, there was no pity, just resolve. Camila gave Nurzhan a quick translation. He listened, nodded slowly, then reached into his backpack and pulled something out. It was a small, worn ring box, velvet faded. He opened it, revealing a simple silver band with no stone. Handmade, perhaps. Humble, but full of meaning. He placed it gently on the table. For her, Camila translated. Elon's throat tightened. It wasn't just the tragedy of the event. It was the grace with which Nurzhan carried it. He didn't want money. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted someone to see her, to remember. Elon picked up the ring and held it for a moment. We'll make sure her story isn't forgotten, he said. And he meant it. Houston's Central Police Station was a relic of 1980s bureaucracy, gray concrete, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of outdated furniture that made everything feel more procedural than personal. Elon Musk stood in the center of it, trying not to let his frustration show. Beside him, Nurzhan remained motionless, his shoulders slumped under the weight of everything he couldn't say. They had waited nearly an hour before being ushered into a cold, sterile room with a cracked vinyl chair and a bored-looking officer with a coffee-stained badge that read Deputy Callahan. Elon launched into the story the moment they sat down, trying to simplify it for believability. But how do you simplify a narrative that includes a fatal drug drop from the sky? There was a police chase in Kazakhstan. Smugglers threw a package from a plane, Elon said, gesturing to Nurzhan. It landed on a girl, killed her instantly. This young man, Nurzhan, was her boyfriend. He's come here to find a surviving relative, possibly the only family he has left. Callahan blinked twice, then chuckled softly. A package of drugs fell out of a plane and landed on someone. Yes. The deputy leaned back, chewing on the corner of a pen. And you're telling me this is why he's here in the States? I'm not telling you anything, Elon replied, his tone flat. I'm asking you to help confirm the story, locate the woman he's looking for, or at the very least, take it seriously enough to register as a missing person or family tracing case. Callahan gave him a long look. You've got money, Mr. Musk. I'll give you that. But you've also got imagination. We don't work off fairy tales here. Maybe this kid just wandered here for a better life. Happens all the time. But a dope drop from the sky. Come on. Elon narrowed his eyes. Are you saying you won't help? I'm saying there's no jurisdiction, no evidence, and no crime committed here. Your friend here's not a fugitive. He's just lost. My hands are tied." A silence hung between them. Elon rose from his chair, his expression unreadable. He placed a hand gently on Nurzhan's shoulder, gave the officer one last, hollow glance, and left the room without another word. Outside, the sun was setting behind a curtain of amber haze. Elon opened the car door for Nurzhan, who entered without asking questions. The boy had expected as much. The police's disinterest wasn't new to him. He had seen it before at home after the accident, at the border, in the airport. Authority didn't concern itself with grief when the story sounded like madness. Elon's home in Houston wasn't a mansion, it was a temporary refuge. A sleek, minimalist house near the outskirts of the city, close to where he sometimes worked when not in Boca Chica. Glass walls, smart systems, lighting that adjusted automatically based on movement and mood. It was designed to impress. But to Nurzhan, it felt like another machine, clean, quiet, foreign. The first night was awkward. Elon showed him the guest room, handed him a fresh towel, change of clothes, basic but new, and gestured toward the tablet that controlled the room's features. Nurzhan didn't touch it. Dinner was a silent affair. Elon reheated something from the fridge and sat at the table, watching as Nurzhan slowly picked at his food, clearly uncomfortable with the utensils. Elon wanted to say something, break the silence, but every sentence died before it reached his lips. What could he possibly say to bridge a chasm so wide? At one point, the hallway light flicked on automatically as Nurzhan stood up to use the bathroom. He recoiled, startled, as if someone had shouted at him. "It's just motion sensors," Elon explained from across the room. Nurzhan nodded quickly, but his eyes remained wary. Later that night, Elon passed by the guest room to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, Nurzhan had turned off all the lights. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the photograph of Amina laid out in front of him, lit only by the glow of his phone's screen. Elon didn't intrude. He just stood there for a moment, watching. This boy, this stranger, had endured something most people couldn't even imagine. And now, he was sitting in a house owned by one of the wealthiest men on Earth, surrounded by walls that responded to touch and floors that adjusted temperature automatically. And yet, nothing in this house could comfort him. Nothing here could make him feel at home. The following days were filled with misconnections. Camila had begun tracing records, but so far, the address led to nothing more than a vacant lot demolished years ago. Elon used private investigators, government contacts, even whispers through diplomatic back channels. Still nothing on Rosa. Meanwhile, Elon and Nurzhan found themselves locked in a kind of quiet standoff. They shared space, but not rhythm. Elon's world was built on precision, scheduled calls, filtered data, punctuality. Nurzhan existed in fragments. He rose late, rarely spoke, wandered the backyard for hours, sometimes staring at the clouds like he expected something to fall from him again. One morning, Elon found him crouched by the back wall, dismantling a small, automatic sprinkler. "What are you doing?" Elon asked. Nurzhan looked up, startled, then held up the sprinkler head, pointing to the nozzle as if to ask, "Why does it spray without warning?" Elon chuckled lightly. "It's timed. The system controls it." Nurzhan frowned and set it down, then mouthed a word Elon didn't understand. Still, in that moment, something passed between them. A kind of truce. Elon walked over, knelt beside him, and picked up the parts. Together, without speaking, they reassembled the sprinkler. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. At night, Elon found himself thinking about the photograph, about the ring box still sitting on the corner of his desk, about the way Nurzhan always sat with his hands folded in his lap, as if bracing for impact. He didn't believe in fate. Not really. But something in this boy, this story, had burrowed into him. Maybe it was the randomness. Maybe it was the injustice. Or maybe it was the quiet, shared understanding that despite their vastly different lives, they both knew what it meant to lose something irreplaceable. Elon couldn't bring Amina back, but he could make sure Nurzhan never had to walk through the rest of this alone. The rain had warped the edges. The ink had bled into the fibers of the paper, like a memory refusing to stay sharp. Camila handled the telegram as delicately as a relic, her fingers tracing the soft, fragile creases. She sat at Elon's kitchen island beneath the gentle hum of recessed lights, translating each surviving word out loud in a slow, reverent tone. Nurzhan sat across from her, eyes wide with attention, as if every syllable she uttered might open a door somewhere. Elon leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching them both. "It says," Camila began, her voice low and careful, "Vim para cuidar de você quando tudo der errado. Me procure." She looked up at Elon. "I came to care for you when everything goes wrong. Find me." The room fell into silence. There was something haunting about it. Those few lines were more than just a message. They were a promise, spoken across oceans and decades, now half erased by rain. Elon took the paper, inspecting the bottom half. The address was once printed there, but now only the beginning of the street name remained: San Jac. San Antonio had hundreds of streets. Several of them began with San Jacinto. But that didn't narrow it down, not when the telegram could be years, even decades old. "We don't know when this was sent," Elon said finally. "Could have been 20 years ago. Could have been last year." Camila nodded. "It's printed, not handwritten. That style of telegram was used up until around the early 2000s in some rural areas." Nurzhan looked between them, clearly trying to understand the flow of the conversation. Camila translated what she could, simplifying the concepts. When she said San Jacinto, Nurzhan's head lifted. "Recognition." "Da-da," he said quickly, pointing to the torn edge of the paper. "San Zatsint." "That's it," Camila confirmed. That's how it would sound to him in Russian phonetics. But even with confirmation, it wasn't enough. Elon knew they couldn't knock on every door in San Antonio. And besides, Rosa might have moved, might no longer be alive. Still, something deep inside him rejected the idea of giving up. Not when the boy was this close to someone who had once promised to catch him when he fell. He tapped his fingers against the island counter, thinking. "You're not going to like this," he muttered to Camila. "What?" "I'm going to use Starlink." Camila blinked. "For a telegram." "For a name," Elon clarified, already walking toward his office. "I'm going to cross-reference anyone named Rosa or Rosa who's ever lived on a San Jacinto street in San Antonio, past or present, using public databases, residential listings, telecom providers, DMV logs. Anything accessible through open data. Maybe even utility records if we have to." "Isn't that a little invasive?" He turned back. "I'm not hacking anyone. I'm triangulating information that's already public. I've done this for supply chain tracing, for satellite collisions. This is nothing. And besides," he paused, "he has no one else." That was enough. Within an hour, Elon had assembled a small task force, 2 trusted engineers from the Starlink data analysis team, patched in remotely. Camila assisted with Russian name variants, adjusting the spelling of Rosa across different systems. On one of the 3 monitors in the room, a glowing map of San Antonio lit up, divided by zip code. Names began appearing like digital fireflies. People named Rosa, Rosina, Roseanne, all tagged addresses connected to San Jacinto streets across the city. There were 37 matches. 13 of those had moved within the last 15 years. 8 were deceased, for couldn't be verified. That left 12. From those, only 3 had immigration records tied to Kazakhstan. Elon's eyes narrowed. 2 of those are under 50, said one of the engineers through the speaker. Only 1 is over 60. Lives alone. No listed children. Last known address updated 5 years ago. Still active on municipal billing systems. That's our best shot, Elon said. The engineer hesitated. Elon, are we really sure about using company infrastructure for this? It's not company infrastructure. It's my infrastructure, Elon replied. Camila glanced at Nurzhan, who had no idea how close he was to finding the woman he had crossed a continent to reach. Elon pointed at the screen. Get me that address. I want a name, a phone number. Hell, I want a photo if it exists in any public record. Minutes later, it came through. Rosa Iskandariyeva, age 68, originally from Pavlodar, Kazakhstan, immigrated to the U.S. in 1996 under a family reunification visa. Listed as residing at a modest one-story home on the east side of San Antonio. Camila gasped softly. Pavlodar, that's Nurzhan's region. She's the one, Elon said. She has to be. That evening, Elon sat down with Nurzhan in the guest room. Camila translated as they explained everything, the torn telegram, the data search, the possibility that they had found Rosa. Nurzhan listened, unmoving at first. Then slowly he brought a hand to his chest and closed his eyes. There were no tears, just a long, shaking exhale. Camila touched his shoulder. We'll go there tomorrow. Elon watched the boy, saw the fragile, flickering hope in his eyes. Something stirred in him. He remembered years ago, staring at an ultrasound screen in a clinic in Los Angeles. The technician had pointed out the small shape, a heartbeat flickering like a tiny star. That moment, too, had felt impossible. Fragile, electric. He had lost that child. And here, in the quiet tension of a guest room in Houston, he felt the same trembling thread of life. Uncertain, miraculous. Later that night, Elon couldn't sleep. He stood outside on the balcony, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, Starlink satellites were moving silently, pulling threads of information from across the world to reunite a grieving boy with the last living memory of home. He smiled faintly. Maybe this was what it meant to build a network that really connected people. Not for profit, not for speed, but for moments like this. The house had grown quieter with each passing day. Not because words had run out, but because none had ever been exchanged. Elon was used to silence in his homes, the kind that accompanied late-night engineering plans or bleary-eyed focus over spreadsheets, but this was different. This silence belonged to someone else. It had moved in with Nurzhan and nested in every corner of the house, a fragile stillness that hovered just out of reach. The boy was a ghost, walking quietly, moving softly, often disappearing into the guest room for hours on end. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't expect anything. And Elon, for all his wealth of ideas, couldn't figure out how to reach him. That evening, Elon had forgotten to turn off the living room TV before going to the kitchen. He'd been microwaving a late dinner, a frozen curry, something he barely tasted, when he heard the faint murmur of Russian speech coming from the screen. He'd queued up a documentary earlier in the week, something on the Cold War's effect on Soviet satellite development. Purely academic. Background noise. But now the volume had risen slightly. He walked back into the living room, still holding the warm plastic tray, and saw Nurzhan standing in front of the TV. His shoulders were tense, his hands curled into his sleeves. The narrator said a word slowly, with emphasis. Dom, took. Elon didn't know it, but Nurzhan did. In that moment, something cracked open inside him. He let out a sob, short, sharp, and covered his face with both hands. His knees buckled slightly, and he sat on the edge of the couch, trembling. Elon didn't move. He placed the tray down on the coffee table and simply waited. The documentary continued, oblivious, but Nurzhan was no longer watching it. He was inside it, somewhere deeper, somewhere unreachable. And then, through the tears, he said it. She was home. The English was shaky, uncertain, but unmistakable. Elon sat beside him, slowly, carefully. She was home, Nurzhan repeated, eyes locked on the carpet. Amina, home. It wasn't just grief. Elon saw it now, in the way Nurzhan clutched his own forearms, the way his voice fractured mid-sentence. This wasn't only about losing someone he loved. It was about losing where he belonged. About watching the compass of his life get shattered by something as stupid and random as a falling object. It was about waking up every day in a place that didn't sound like his mother's language, didn't taste like his village's bread, didn't hold the scent of her shampoo or the sound of the gravel road he'd walked every morning with Amina. A home wasn't a building. It wasn't even a country. It was a person, and Nurzhan had lost his. The next morning, Elon found the guest bathroom door open and steam curling out like fog. The sound of running water had just stopped. Moments later, Nurzhan emerged wearing a clean t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair, still wet, clung to his forehead, and his skin had a pink hue from the warmth of the shower. But what struck Elon wasn't the image of cleanliness, it was the change in Nurzhan's posture. He wasn't curled inward. His spine was straighter. His hands weren't hidden in his sleeves. He looked, if only for a moment, like someone beginning to return to himself. Elon greeted him gently. "Morning." Nurzhan nodded. They sat down at the kitchen island. Elon poured orange juice. Nurzhan took a slice of toast, spreading peanut butter on it with slow, precise motions. There was no need to push. Something had shifted, and that was enough. Elon picked up his tablet and casually swiped through some news updates, half expecting a rocket failure, a shareholder crisis, or a tweet gone viral to interrupt the calm. But instead, his thoughts drifted. She was home. Those 3 words clung to him like static. Elon couldn't shake them. He remembered being in a hospital room once, years ago. A woman he loved had just given birth, and he'd stared at the tiny bundle in her arms and thought, this is it. This is what home looks like. Then later, after the arguments, the silence, the unbearable loss, he had looked around his empty house and realized that walls and windows meant nothing. Home had left with her. Now, watching Nurzhan quietly sip his juice, he felt that ache return, not painfully, but as a reminder. A bond forming in the strange language of shared loss. Camila arrived later that day, carrying a small bag of groceries and a hopeful smile. "Any more Russian documentaries queued up?" she teased as she stepped inside. Elon smirked. "Accidental therapy session, it turns out." Camila glanced toward the dining area and saw Nurzhan reading a printed sheet, some vocabulary words she had left for him the day before. "How's he doing?" He spoke. Camila's eyebrows shot up. In English. 3 words. What did he say? Elon looked at her, his voice softer than usual. She was home. Camila covered her mouth. "Wow. I don't think he meant it metaphorically," Elon added. Or maybe he did. Either way, it mattered. She nodded, her eyes damp. He's starting to come back. They didn't need to say what coming back meant. Not really. It wasn't just about language or routine or even finding Rosa. It was about reassembling something inside himself, piecing together a soul that had been shattered. That night, after dinner, Nurzhan sat with Elon on the porch. The Texas sky stretched above them in a tapestry of stars, and the cicadas buzzed like distant static. Elon pointed to a flickering dot moving across the sky. "That one Starlink," he said, "probably transmitting data right now." Nurzhan squinted, then looked back down. He hesitated. Then, in slow, halting English, he said, "You helped find her?" Elon looked at him. "We're almost there." Nurzhan nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The scent filled the house long before Camila called them to the table. It was earthy and comforting. Onions caramelizing in a shallow pan, lamb slow simmered with spices Elon couldn't name, rice steaming with dried fruits and slivered carrots. It was the kind of aroma that didn't belong in smart homes or sterile kitchens. It belonged in homes built for memory. Camila moved through the kitchen with calm precision, sleeves rolled up, strands of hair pulled into a loose knot at the back of her neck. She hummed softly as she poured strong black tea into thick glasses, the kind that trap heat and release it slowly. She'd spent the morning texting her grandmother in Monterey, asking how best to adapt certain Kazakh dishes with American ingredients. When she told Elon her idea, "Let's cook a meal he'll recognize," he hadn't hesitated. Now, as Nurzhan emerged from his room, drawn by the unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar aroma, something in his face shifted. The boy who had slept curled into himself for days now stood a little taller, eyes scanning the table, lingering on the pot of rice and lamb with something close to disbelief. Camila met him halfway with a warm smile. "Plov," she said, "not exactly your mother's recipe, but I did my best." Nurzhan blinked. His mouth opened slightly, and then, a rarity so subtle it could have gone unnoticed, he smiled. Not a full grin, not even with teeth, but enough to crease the corners of his eyes. Enough to change the air in the room. Elon watched from the doorway, arms crossed, pretending not to stare too hard. They sat around the table, Camila at one end, Nurzhan in the middle, Elon opposite him, uncertain about the etiquette but willing to follow. A bowl of borsak, the fried dough pillows, sat between them. The tea steamed gently in their glasses. Camila served each plate with care, handing Nurzhan the biggest portion and watching as he nodded his thanks. She translated for him when necessary, but increasingly, he didn't need it. He was beginning to pick up the rhythm of their speech, the pauses and inflections. The first bites were quiet. Nurzhan chewed slowly, his eyes closed as if listening to a song from his past. Then he laughed. It was small, just a puff of air and a crinkle at his nose, but it was real. Camila looked over, surprised. "Too salty?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. Good. Very childhood." Elon raised his glass. "To childhood, then." They clinked their glasses together with a quiet tink. The meal unfolded slowly, like a story being told through spices and textures. Elon wasn't used to dinners like this, dinners without a clock in the background, without his phone buzzing every 5 minutes, without the undercurrent of obligation or efficiency. This dinner had no agenda. He tried the lamb. It was tender, unexpectedly fragrant. He tried the tea, bitter, dark, not quite like anything he'd had before. But it grounded him, anchored him in something that had nothing to do with launches or deadlines. "I don't usually do this," Elon said suddenly. Camila raised an eyebrow. "Eat." He grinned. "Eat with people." She chuckled. "Maybe you should do it more often." Nurzhan looked between them, understanding only parts, but he smiled anyway. The warmth was infectious. The house, so recently filled with awkwardness and unspoken weight, now felt almost normal. For a moment, they weren't a billionaire, a refugee, and a translator. They were just 3 people around a table, sharing food and stories shaped by grief and resilience. Camila asked about Elon's favorite childhood dish. He confessed he couldn't remember. It had been too long since anyone had made him a home-cooked meal. He spoke about growing up in Pretoria, the powdered soup, the books piled beside his plate. Camila told them how her abuela used to scold her for pouring milk before cereal. They laughed at that, and then Nurzhan surprised them both. "My mother," he began slowly, searching for words. "She make lagman." With, he mimed twisting noodles, then smacked his lips. "Hand-pulled noodles," Camila said. "Logman, yes. Delicious." "She always hum," he added. "Song with food. Not words. Just MMMM." Elon's expression softened. "That's beautiful," he said. "She say, food no good if heart is closed." They all fell silent for a moment, each absorbing the meaning in their own way. Elon looked down at his plate. "Smart woman." Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and Camila had gone, Nurzhan helped dry the last of the silverware, his gestures calm and methodical. Elon leaned against the kitchen counter, a towel slung over his shoulder. "She would like you," Nurzhan said softly. "Who?" Elon asked. "Amina." Elon didn't know what to say, so he nodded. "She say, world needs strange people," Nurzhan continued. "She say, strange ones make new things." Elon smiled at that. Then she would have made a hell of an engineer. Nurzhan laughed again. This time it was fuller, more certain. They stood there in a quiet kitchen, 2 people who might never have met had the world not folded in on itself. And yet here they were, sifting through broken pieces, sharing the warmth of something they hadn't dared to hope for. Before going to bed, Elon paused outside the guest room. "Good night," he said. Nurzhan looked up from his pillow. "Good night, Elon." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And as Elon walked back to his own room, he realized something that made him stop mid-step. He felt lighter, not because anything had been fixed, but because something had finally been shared. The sun was barely up when Elon emerged from his office, eyes heavy but focused. On the sleek wall-mounted screen behind him glowed a list of names, 7 women named Rosa who had at some point resided in or around San Antonio. 7 names, 7 possible lives, 7 doors that could lead to the woman who once promised to catch Nurzhan when the world failed him. Camila sipped her coffee in the kitchen, scanning the data. She pointed to the 4th name on the list. Rosa Iskandarieva, immigration record from Pavlodar, Kazakhstan. Arrived in 1996. Age matches. No recent digital footprint. She's our best lead, Elon said, grabbing his car keys. We drive. Camila glanced toward the hallway. Should I wake him? But before she could move, Nurzhan appeared, already dressed, his backpack over his shoulder. He hadn't needed to be told. His eyes met Elon's briefly, tired, cautious, but ready. They set out just after dawn, the morning mist still lifting off the asphalt as they left Houston behind. Elon drove. Camila sat in the back, flipping through the research again, cross-referencing addresses and dates with phone directories and obscure data leaks. Nurzhan rode up front, silent, his gaze fixed on the passing fields like they held answers, if only he could read them fast enough. For miles, no one spoke. Then, somewhere between Sealy and Luling, with wind blurring the edges of the road and sunlight slicing through rows of pine, Nurzhan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. It looked old. The edges were worn soft, the clasp slightly loose. He held it for a moment, then opened it carefully. Inside were 2 rings, thin, tarnished, and modest. They didn't sparkle. They didn't need to. Camila leaned forward, curious. Are those? Nurzhan nodded, then looked at Elon. Amina. She gave me this. From her parents. Elon slowed the car slightly, but kept his eyes on the road. Why? Nurzhan gazed out the window, fingers gently touching the rings. She say, love is only thing that cross sky, without fall. No one responded at first. The car seemed to absorb the weight of the sentence, filling with something beyond language. Across the sky without falling, Camila repeated softly, as if testing the phrase on her tongue. It's beautiful, Elon said finally. True, too. Gravity can't touch it. Nurzhan smiled faintly, then closed the box and placed it back into his pocket. The drive took nearly 4 hours. Outside San Antonio, the roads twisted into older neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and aging porches. Camila read the directions aloud, voice steady. Elon gripped the wheel tighter with each turn. They were closing in. Rosa's last known residence was a modest home at the edge of a low-rise neighborhood where the houses still wore the color of the 1980s, faded yellows, chipped browns, stucco in need of repainting. The lawn was overgrown. The mailbox leaned at an angle, and a few dried weeds curled through the cracks in the driveway. The house was quiet. No car, no lights. Elon parked across the street. They sat there for a moment, staring. Camila was the first to break the silence. We should go together. Elon nodded. Nurzhan had already unbuckled his seatbelt. As they walked toward the front door, Elon glanced at the porch. A wind chime swayed gently in the breeze, producing a delicate, hollow sound. The doorbell didn't work, so he knocked. They waited. Nothing. Camila knocked again, louder. Still nothing. They were about to leave when a curtain inside moved. Slowly. Then the door creaked open just a few inches, revealing a single eye peering through the gap. Camila stepped forward. Rosa Iskandarieva. The door stayed closed. My name is Camila. This is Elon. And this, she gestured toward the young man beside her, is Nurzhan. He came from Kazakhstan to find you. The door remained shut for several long seconds. Then it opened fully. Rosa stood there, smaller than expected. Her hair was dark, streaked with gray, pulled back into a low bun. Her skin was light with a yellow undertone, marked with the deep lines of a life lived long and hard. Her eyes were narrow, their light dulled by age but still sharp, still searching. She didn't speak. She looked at Nurzhan long and deep, then reached out and placed a hand on his cheek. Malinki Nurzhan. She whispered, voice thin and trembling. His lips parted. He couldn't speak. Rosa pulled him into her arms without waiting. He didn't cry. Not fully. but his arms wrapped around her as if trying to remember what she smelled like, how tall she had been the last time, how tightly she had ever held him. Elon and Camila watched in stillness, witnesses to a reunion stitched together by luck, faith, and digital persistence. After several minutes, Rosa gestured for them to come inside. The house was small but warm. Pictures in wooden frames lined the hallway, some in black and white, others in faded color. Tea boiled in the kitchen. The living room smelled faintly of old books and rose water. They sat on a worn sofa, and Rosa poured tea for everyone, her hands trembling slightly, but her composure unwavering. She didn't need a translator. Her English, though rusty, was clear. "He looks like his mother," she said. "She was my cousin. I raised her for some years. Then she died. I tried to bring Nurzhan here after that, but there were complications." "Why didn't you reach out?" Elon asked gently. Rosa looked down at her tea. "I sent a telegram. I never heard back." Camila and Elon exchanged a glance. "It was torn," Camila said. "The rain ruined part of it." Rosa nodded. "I waited. For years." Then she looked at Nurzhan again. "But you came." That night, as they drove back to Houston, Nurzhan held the ring box in one hand and a new memory in the other. A voice, a face, a warmth that survived the cold of borders and bureaucracy. Elon didn't say much, but every few minutes, he glanced at the boy in the passenger seat and thought of what Amina had said. Love is the only thing that crosses the sky without falling. He believed her now. The road back to Houston stretched long and silent, paved in a soft Texas dusk that made the horizon look like it was melting. The air inside the car was still, peaceful. Camila had dozed off in the back seat, her head leaning gently against the window. Nurzhan, in the passenger seat, had finally succumbed to sleep, the kind that only comes after emotional exhaustion. His body slouched slightly, hands folded over his lap, the small velvet box still nestled between his fingers. Elon drove. He didn't mind the silence. It gave him space to think. And more than that, it gave him space to feel. There hadn't been many such moments in the last decade. Even when surrounded by people, Elon was often miles away, distracted by calculations, projections, visions of Mars. But now, as the tires hummed along the asphalt and the boy beside him finally looked at peace, Elon felt something unexpected: stillness. His phone buzzed, vibrating against the cup holder with a sound too sharp for the moment. He glanced down. Unknown number. He frowned. Only a few contacts in his life used number blocking. Most were journalists he ignored or security pings from internal systems. But this was different. Something told him to answer. He tapped the screen. Musk. There was a pause. Then a voice. Feminine. Strong. Accented. "Are you with Nurzhan?" The way she said his name made Elon sit upright. "Yes," he answered, unsure whether to say more. The voice came again, slower this time. "I waited so long for this." Another pause. Then, almost like an exhale, "I'm home." The line went dead. Elon blinked. The call had lasted no more than 15 seconds. He pulled over to the shoulder of the road, the car rolling to a gentle stop beneath a sprawling oak tree. The last hues of daylight shimmered behind it like a faded painting. Camila stirred behind him. "What's wrong?" Elon didn't answer immediately. He turned and looked at Nurzhan. The boy hadn't moved. His breathing was even, almost rhythmic. Whatever dream held him, it had managed to loosen the grip of the world's weight for now. "A woman called," Elon said softly, Eastern European accent. "Asked if I was with him." Camila rubbed her eyes. "What else did she say?" "She said she waited a long time, and that she's home." Then hung up. Camila's brows furrowed. "No name." "No number either," he replied, showing the screen. "What if it's someone from his past?" she asked. "Family? Someone connected to Amina?" "Possibly," Elon said. But the tone in his voice was different now. The edges were tighter, more alert. Camila leaned forward. "You think it's something else?" "I think," he hesitated. "I think it wasn't just a message for him." Camila studied him for a beat. "What do you mean?" Elon stared through the windshield, eyes distant. I mean, she said she's home. But the way she said it, it felt like she was waiting for me, too. Camila was quiet. She didn't question him, didn't ask for proof. Something about the past week had changed the way she saw Elon. This wasn't the man who only communicated in launch schedules and progress metrics. This was someone who'd let a stranger into his home, who'd shared silence like language, who now stood on the edge of a mystery not entirely his own. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. Elon started the engine again, gently easing the car back onto the highway. "I'm going to trust the pattern." The rest of the drive was uneventful, but Elon's mind was racing. He had already asked his security team to track the number, though he suspected they'd find nothing. If the woman had masked her call at the network level, something a person with even modest tech savvy could do, it would lead to a dead end. Still, he had people looking. By the time they arrived back at the house, the moon was high and the sky cloudless. Nurzhan woke slowly, confused at first, then recognizing the driveway and exhaling a breath that sounded like relief. Rosa had agreed to join them in a few days. She wanted to prepare some things, gather keepsakes, organize her modest apartment. Elon had offered to send a driver, even a helicopter, but she refused. "I travel on my own terms," she'd said, with a firm wave of her hand that reminded him of a launch director delaying liftoff. Inside, Elon set his phone on the counter, refreshed his inbox, then stopped. A new message. No sender. Just a string of words. You don't know what you've begun, but soon you will. No link, no attachments, just those words. He read them 3 times before showing Camila. "What the hell?" she murmured. Elon turned the screen off and slid it into a drawer. That night, while Camila and Nurzhan slept, Elon returned to the porch and looked up at the sky. The same sky Amina had spoken about. The one love could cross without falling. He wondered how many signals were floating above him right now. How many stories, how many ghosts. He thought about the strange call, the anonymous message, the pain he had seen in Nurzhan's eyes, and the healing that had begun to sprout in the cracks. And he realized something. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't even about closure. It was about something unfinished inside himself, something he had buried in layers of ambition, complexity, and isolation. And now, through a boy who barely spoke his language, through a journey stitched with grief, tea, and ancient rings, that something was waking up. The cycle wasn't just Nurzhan's. It was his too, and it was far from over. The road leading to the house narrowed into a gravel path hemmed by wild sunflowers, and the occasional fence sat leaning like it had grown tired over time. The GPS had stopped guiding them 5 minutes earlier, unable to parse the last mile of rural turns. But Elon didn't need coordinates anymore. He recognized the feeling, the quiet anticipation, the strange certainty that they were close. Ahead, nestled between 2 wide oaks, stood a modest wooden house. The paint had long since faded into a soft gray blue, and flowering vines curled lovingly around the porch pillars. The windows were old, the glass slightly warped, catching the light in uneven glints. A wind chime above the door whispered a brittle, almost shy melody. Camila leaned forward in her seat. "This has to be it." Elon parked the car slowly, careful not to stir too much gravel beneath the tires. Nurzhan didn't wait for permission. He stepped out, feet crunching softly on the stones, eyes locked on the house, as if he were walking toward a dream that might vanish if he blinked too hard. The air was thick with scent of jasmine, soil, and something older, almost like memory. Elon followed behind him, with Camila close beside. He approached the porch steps and raised his hand to knock. But before his knuckles touched the wood, a movement behind the lace curtain window caught his eye. A woman's silhouette. She had been standing there all along. Her face appeared slowly, as if she didn't want to startle them. Hair white as ash, tied back in a low bun. Eyes narrow, watchful. Her hand rested lightly against the glass, unmoving. Then she saw him. Nurzhan. Even through the distortion of the curtain, her expression changed. The eyes that had watched with caution now brimmed with something deeper, recognition, disbelief, an emotion held back for too many years. Elon stepped aside. He didn't need to knock. The door opened gently with a familiar creak, as though it hadn't forgotten how to welcome someone home. Rosa stood in the doorway, smaller than he imagined, frail in body, but her presence filled the porch. Her skin bore the soft yellow hue of age, etched with deep lines that traced 1,000 silent worries. Her lips parted but made no sound. Nurzhan froze. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then he ran. He crossed the threshold in a breath, and Rosa opened her arms without hesitation. He buried his face in her shoulder. She cradled the back of his head like she had done when he was small, and they sank into each other like puzzle pieces long, separated. No words, just the hush of grief exhaled in reunion. Camila stepped back, hand to her mouth. Elon remained still on the porch, watching as something sacred unfolded without him, but not beyond him. He didn't feel like an outsider. Not entirely. He felt like someone witnessing a part of himself he hadn't known was missing, taking shape in front of him. After long minutes, Rosa guided Nurzhan inside, her hand resting on his cheek as they moved. Elon and Camila followed, softly, reverently. The house smelled of old wood and mint tea. A woven rug stretched across the living room floor. There were shelves filled with books, most in Russian, and framed photos, many in black and white. A small radio sat on the windowsill, still playing a Kazakh folk song faintly through dust-coated speakers. They sat down on a faded floral couch. Rosa and Nurzhan side by side. She hadn't stopped touching him. Her fingers traced the curve of his jaw, brushed his hair aside, touched his shoulder as if verifying he was real. Nurzhan didn't cry. His eyes stayed locked on hers, wide and full of so much more than tears could carry. "You look like her," Rosa finally whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Your mother. You have her stillness." Nurzhan nodded. Camila translated softly for Elon, though most of the message needed no translation. Rosa turned her gaze toward Elon and Camila. "Thank you," she said in accented English. "He was gone to me. I thought I lost him forever." Elon offered a small, respectful nod. "We're just glad he's here now." Rosa's eyes narrowed, studying him not unkindly. "You brought him across the sky." Elon smiled faintly. He crossed it on his own. "I just made sure he didn't fall." They spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet companionship. Rosa brewed strong tea and set out dried fruits and a sweet bread she'd baked that morning, just in case. She admitted she hadn't known who might knock on her door, but something in her bones had told her to be ready, to believe again. Nurzhan wandered the living room slowly, stopping at each photograph. Rosa narrated them one by one, pointing out cousins' birthdays, a snowstorm in Pavlodar, a wedding in the 80s. Every image pulled him closer to the root of himself. Later, Rosa showed him a locked drawer from which she pulled a small wooden box. Inside were letters, some yellowed and crumbling, some unopened. One was addressed to him. She had written it 2 years after he disappeared from her life. She never sent it. She had no address. But she had written it anyway, hoping that someday he would find it. Nurzhan read it with trembling hands, then placed it back in the box with the same care he gave to the rings in his pocket. Before they left that evening, Rosa pulled Elon aside. "I watched him disappear," she said quietly. "Now I watch him return." Elon nodded. "You didn't have to help him, but you did." "I think I needed it as much as he did," he admitted. Rosa's lips curved in a soft, tired smile. "Then maybe we all found something." As they drove away under the deepening night sky, Elon glanced at Nurzhan, who stared quietly out the window, fingers resting gently against the glass. Not lost anymore. Not entirely. And Elon, for the first time in years, felt something in his chest relax, like a lock had turned and a room long closed had been opened. He hadn't just delivered a boy home. He'd found his way back too. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath Elon's feet as he paced slowly near the fireplace, watching the flickering shadows cast by the dim lamp on the table. Outside, the Texas evening gave way to a deep cobalt sky. Crickets chirped in rhythm with the stillness that had settled inside the house. On the couch, Tia Rosa sat with her hands resting on a weathered wooden box, its corners rounded from time and touch. Next to her, Nurzhan sat cross-legged, eyes tracing the grain of the wood as if trying to decode memories from its surface. Rosa opened the box with deliberate care, revealing photographs, postcards, and letters folded with the meticulousness of someone who believed the soul could be stored in paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted a black and white photograph from the top. It was of two young women in the snowy fields of Almaty, arms wrapped around each other, eyes glinting with mischief and youth. "That's your mother," Rosa whispered in Kazakh, pointing to the woman on the left. "And that's me. We were more than sisters. We were shadows of each other. What she felt, I felt." Elon, seated now on a wooden chair near the window, leaned in as Camila joined them, holding a cup of tea for Rosa. Camila hadn't spoken much since they arrived, but her silence was filled with presence, a witness to this quiet resurrection of a family thought lost. Rosa pulled out a thin envelope, the edges browned with age. "The telegram. This was all I could manage after everything collapsed," she said in English, her accent thick but clear. "No phones, no internet, just hope and a very kind postman." She looked at Elon with tired but bright eyes. "I didn't know if it would reach him. I didn't know if he was even alive, but I had to try." Nurzhan took the letter with careful hands. His fingers hovered over the faded ink, as if touching it too firmly might erase its magic. A word stood out to him: home. He mouthed it silently and looked up. "Did she ever write back?" he asked. Rosa shook her head. "I think she never got it. Or she couldn't answer. Maybe she was already gone." Elon watched the exchange, feeling something stir inside him. A mix of awe and sorrow. All his life, he had believed in systems, in order, in rational solutions. But here was a reunion crafted by things messier and harder to quantify: longing, memory, love. Things that couldn't be coded or simulated, only felt. Rosa reached into the box again and pulled out a notebook wrapped in a red cloth. She unfolded it with reverence and handed it to Nurzhan. Inside were handwritten recipes in a mix of Russian and Kazakh, small sketches of herbs, notes in the margins, and grease-stained pages marked with dates. She loved to cook, Rosa said. This was her language of love. Every dish told a story. "She made this for you." Nurzhan clutched the notebook to his chest. "I remember the smell," he said, voice fragile. "Even if I forgot the name of the dish, I remember the smell." A tear slipped down Rosa's cheek. "Then you remember her." They sat for a long time, without speaking. The clock ticked. The air was heavy with things unsaid, but none of it felt burdensome. Elon looked at the worn floorboards, the photos lined on the shelf, the cracked porcelain bowl on the coffee table. He was in a place where love had refused to die quietly. And somehow, he had become part of its resurrection. Rosa turned to him at last. "Why did you help him?" she asked gently, without accusation. Elon paused. "Because I saw myself in him, and because someone once helped me when I had nothing left." She nodded as if that answer completed circle. "You have a good heart. Hidden maybe, but good." Camila smiled softly at that. Later, as Rosa prepared a simple dinner, flatbread, pickled vegetables, and a beef stew that filled the house with comforting aromas, Elon walked through the small backyard. The air was cooler now. He looked up at the stars beginning to pepper the sky. Somewhere among them, satellites of his own design orbited quietly, relaying data, signals, possibilities. But none of them could predict this. An old woman's letter, a broken line of communication, a journey halfway across the world sparked by a boy with eyes too full of loss for his age. Camila joined him outside, wrapping her arms in her cardigan. "Are you okay?" she asked. Elon nodded. "I just didn't expect this. Any of this." She followed his gaze skyward. "I think sometimes the heart knows how to plot a course better than any algorithm." He looked at her amused. "You've been spending too much time around me." That sounded suspiciously technical. She laughed. Maybe. Or maybe it's just what happens when you stop trying to solve everything and start feeling it instead. Inside, Rosa and Nurzhan sat side by side, eating quietly, the notebook open between them. Rosa pointed to one recipe and mimicked the motions of stirring, then pinching salt, then tasting. Nurzhan mimicked her shyly, then chuckled when she gave him a playful smack on the wrist for pretending to use too much pepper. It was the sound of life resuming, of ties being rethreaded. And Elon, for once, didn't need to understand it. He just needed to witness it. As they all gathered around the table again, bowls in hand, and hands occasionally brushing, Elon felt a rare warmth spread through him. Not from the food, from the human presence. From knowing that somewhere in the vast equation of existence, one small problem had found its solution, not through logic, but through love. Tomorrow would bring more uncertainties, more roads to follow. But tonight, they had found each other, and that somehow was enough. The sun had barely begun to filter through the curtains when Rosa tapped softly on the guest room door. Elon stirred on the narrow bed, still adjusting to the creaks and unfamiliar scent of old wood and dried herbs that seemed to linger in every corner of Rosa's home. Nurzhan was already up, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his bed, his face glowing with an energy Elon hadn't seen before. "She said we should go early," Nurzhan whispered, almost reverently. "Go where?" Elon asked, groggily rubbing his eyes. "To the lake." It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was something older than both of them, something already decided by time itself. Elon got up, quickly washed his face, and followed the scent of strong black tea into the kitchen, where Rosa was slicing bread and humming an old Kazakh lullaby. An hour later, the three of them were in Elon's rented SUV, winding through the quiet Texas backroads. The city faded behind them, and with it, the noise, the questions, the expectations. The fields opened wide, dotted with wildflowers and framed by trees that whispered in the wind like they remembered stories no one told anymore. Rosa guided them from the back seat. "Left here. Now right. Just past that white oak." Eventually, the road gave way to a dirt path, and then a clearing. There it was, a modest lake, its waters still and glistening, nestled between low hills and framed by weeping willows that bent toward the water like guardians in prayer. A single wooden dock jutted into the water, old and worn but strong. "This place," Rosa's voice cracked as she stepped out of the car. "This was my sister's sanctuary. When we came to America, it was the only place that made her forget she was far from home." Nurzhan stood still for a moment, staring at the water. The wind tousled his short black hair, and the usual melancholy in his eyes seemed to flicker, as if wrestling with something deeper, a memory, a scent, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Then, without a word, he ran toward the lake. He kicked off his shoes. The dry earth clung to his heels. He pulled off his shirt, then dove headfirst into the water with a shout so loud it startled the birds from the trees. It was the sound of a weight being thrown off. Elon watched, stunned. The boy who had once spoken in half-sentences, who had stared at the ground as if afraid the earth might swallow him, was now thrashing, laughing, splashing with a joy that had nothing to do with logic or reason. It was pure primal release. Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she clapped her hands. "Look at him," she exclaimed. "My nephew. My brave boy." Elon, caught up in a moment, pulled out his phone and snapped a picture, Nurzhan mid-splash, his arms stretched wide, droplets suspended in air like stardust. "This," Elon chuckled, showing the photo to Rosa, "is going to be my new wallpaper." Rosa placed her hand gently over his and said softly, "No, Elon, this is going to be your soul's wallpaper." He froze. The words hit harder than expected, not because they were poetic, but because they were true. In that moment, he realized how deeply the past few days had shifted something inside him. Not just the mystery of Nurzhan, not just the reunion with Rosa, but the peeling back of a life that had been layered in noise, decisions, deadlines. He had been building rockets, launching satellites, shaping futures, but somehow he had forgotten how to just be human. As Nurzhan swam to the edge of the lake, Rosa walked to the dock and sat down, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "I used to sit here," she said, half to Elon, half to the wind, "with my sister. We would talk for hours, sometimes in Kazakh, sometimes in silence. The silence meant more. It always does when you love someone." Nurzhan climbed onto the dock, soaked and smiling, his short hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his slender frame. He looked at Rosa and then at Elon. "You should try," he said, nodding toward the lake. Elon raised an eyebrow. "Me? No, I think I'm good as the photographer." "No," Rosa said firmly, eyes locked on him. "You carry too much in your chest. The water helps." He hesitated, then stood, and in one swift motion, as if driven by something outside himself, he walked to the edge of the dock, took off his shoes, rolled up his pants, and jumped. The cold water hit him like a shock, but almost immediately it turned warm. Not physically, but in its effect. It wrapped around him like a reset button. The pressure of expectations dissolved. The grief he hadn't admitted to, the fatigue he never confessed, the questions he didn't dare ask, they all scattered into the ripples. He surfaced laughing. Real, chest-deep laughter that surprised even him. Nurzhan laughed too, swimming circles around him. Rosa clapped again, this time slower, more rhythmically, like honoring a tradition. For the next hour, they took turns diving, floating, resting on the dock with wet hair and wrinkled fingers. Rosa told them stories of her homeland, of her sister's wedding, of the time they had almost lost each other crossing a frozen river. As the sun began to dip below the trees, casting golden streaks across the lake, Elon sat at the edge of the dock, feet dangling in the water. Nurzhan lay beside him, arms behind his head, eyes closed. Rosa, wrapped in a shawl, hummed the same lullaby from that morning. Elon looked at them, then at the sky. He hadn't solved anything that week, not really. But he had found something, or perhaps something had found him. Peace didn't always come through understanding. Sometimes it came through a lake, a boy's laughter, and an old woman's wisdom. Sometimes it came through surrender. And in that surrender, Elon felt something open, not just in Nurzhan, not just in Rosa, but in himself. A door that had been locked for years was now ajar, and the breeze smelled like home. The morning of their departure was tender and unspoken. The air carried a strange stillness, not quite sad, but reverent, like a chapel after a song. Roosters called in the distance, their voices echoing over the empty field behind the house. Sunlight spilled lazily across the kitchen floor, falling in wide strips through the lace curtains. Rosa moved quietly through the small home, her steps unhurried, her breath deeper than usual, as if savoring every corner, every crack in the wood that had witnessed this return. Elon sipped his coffee on the porch, eyes lost in the movement of wind through the trees. Camila was packing the trunk of the SUV, carefully folding a few bags and securing Rosa's notebook in the front seat. Inside, Nurzhan stood by the bookshelf, his fingers trailing over the spines like they were relatives, familiar and filled with stories that had been waiting for him. Rosa appeared in the hallway holding a small, polished wooden box with a brass clasp. It was warm but beautifully made, its edges smoothed by time, its scent rich with cedar and something faintly sweet, like old flowers. She didn't say a word, just held it out to Nurzhan with both hands. He accepted it gently. They sat at the table, the same one where they had shared tea and stories, laughter and tears. Elon joined them quietly, setting his mug aside. Rosa gestured for Nurzhan to open the box. Inside lay a modest collection, a small carved horse no larger than a thumb, smoothed on one side by the grip of a child's hand, a folded cloth embroidered with sun symbols in gold thread, a few old photographs, their edges curled, some barely visible from the fading ink. And then there was a letter, its paper yellowed, the writing in Russian, fluid and looping. Tucked beneath it was a necklace, a simple leather cord holding a single amber stone, warm and translucent, like a drop of frozen honey. Nurzhan stared at it, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Rosa nodded. "From your mother," she said softly in Kazakh. She wrote it when you were a baby. She gave it to me the day she left to find a better life for both of you." Nurzhan's hands trembled as he lifted the letter. He looked at Elon and then, with a barely audible voice, asked, "Can you read it?" Elon, caught off guard, blinked. "Are you sure?" Nurzhan nodded. His voice cracked. "Please." Elon took the letter carefully, adjusted his reading glasses, and began. Camila stepped in from outside, quietly closing the door behind her. The air in the room shifted. Every breath became still. He read slowly, translating word by word. "My son, if you are reading this, it means life has carried you far. I wish I were there to see it. You were born under a quiet sky and held in arms filled with dreams. The world is not always kind, but you must be. Be strong, yes, but never forget to be soft. Build, but don't forget to rest. Run, but know when to return. And if you ever feel lost, look for the amber. It is your light. You are not alone. My love will find you even across oceans. Mama." By the last words, Elon's voice had thinned. He tried to continue, but his throat tightened. He looked up, blinking away something in his eyes. The room was silent except for the soft sound of breath catching. Nurzhan pressed the necklace to his chest and closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his cheek, not sharp, not bitter, but full of something older than grief. A release, a memory, a promise. Rosa reached across the table and laid her hand over his. Her touch was steady, unshaken. She had seen too many cycles of loss and returned to flinch now. Her eyes, though misted, held peace. Camila, standing in the doorway with one hand on her heart, whispered, "It's like she's here." Elon didn't respond. He couldn't. Something inside him had turned soft and heavy. He'd read 1,000 messages in his life, launch reports, algorithms, contracts. But none had ever held the weight of this one. This wasn't data. This was devotion, trapped in paper, finally set free. Nurzhan placed the wooden horse back in the box, wrapped the letter in the cloth, and closed the lid. He stood slowly, walked to Rosa, and hugged her, not a polite embrace, not hesitant, but full and deep, like someone trying to absorb time through skin. "Thank you," he whispered, "for waiting." Rosa smiled into his shoulder. It was never a question. They loaded the car in silence. The sun had risen fully now, casting long golden beams across the gravel path. Nurzhan sat in the back, the box resting carefully in his lap, one hand resting on it protectively. Elon sat behind the wheel, but he didn't start the engine right away. He looked in the mirror and caught Nurzhan's eyes. There was something different now, still reflective, still gentle, but grounded. Like the boy who had once cried on a roadside had become a man who understood where he came from. And Elon, he didn't know exactly what he felt, but he knew it was something rare. Maybe love, maybe healing, maybe just the simple realization that sometimes the most powerful technologies in the world couldn't compare to the contents of an old box and a letter from a mother. As the engine hummed to life and the road pulled them slowly away from Rosa's house, Elon glanced at the photo on his phone, the one of Nurzhan in the lake, frozen in joy. He replaced it with a new one, a close-up of the amber pendant resting in Nurzhan's hand, catching the morning light. Because some images weren't just memories. They were reminders of what mattered, of what endures. The hum of machinery echoed softly through the halls of SpaceX's administrative wing, but inside Elon's private office, there was an unfamiliar silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but expectant, like a room holding its breath. Nurzhan stood in the middle of that room, a soft ray of late afternoon sun catching the edge of a delicate brass gear between his fingers. The clock on the far wall, a vintage, oversized timepiece encased in oak and glass, had sat frozen for months. Elon had received it as a gift years ago, an antique from a Russian engineer he admired. It had ticked faithfully until the week after a particularly painful failure, a launch scrubbed, an investor pulled out, and a friend lost. Elon never had it repaired. Some part of him believed the broken clock was fitting, a monument to pauses. Nurzhan hadn't asked permission. He hadn't even said he noticed the clock. But while Elon was away in meetings and project briefings, the boy returned to the office every day. A small blue cloth laid out on Elon's desk had become his repair station. Next to it, cotton gloves, a magnifying glass, and a series of delicate screwdrivers that had once belonged to Rosa's late husband, carefully wrapped and brought from San Antonio. The task demanded the kind of patience that Nurzhan had learned not in workshops, but in life. He didn't force the screws. He didn't rush the cleaning. He disassembled the mechanism the same way one learns to grieve, gently, reverently, and knowing that things wouldn't ever be exactly the same again. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could still work. On the fourth day, Elon entered his office just before sunset. He was bone-tired, his mind overrun with logistics and budgets. His eyes drifted toward the window, then paused, caught not by the sky, but by the quiet tick-tick-tick coming from a wall. He blinked. The clock. The second hand was moving slow, smooth, precise. He stepped closer, almost afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too fast. "You fix it?" he asked, voice soft and surprised. Nurzhan, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor beneath the desk, looked up and nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Sometimes," he said with a shy smile, "time needs care too." Elon stared at him for a moment longer, 1,000 thoughts crashing behind his eyes. There were people who broke things and walked away, others who replaced them. And then there were people like Nurzhan, who saw the value in something broken, not because it worked, but because it once did. That clock hadn't just marked time. It had watched over moments of fury and hope, despair and dreams. It had been silent during some of Elon's darkest stretches. And now it was ticking again, not as a convenience, but as a testament. He sat down slowly, hands clasped. "What made you decide to fix it?" he asked. Nurzhan tilted his head. "I don't like things that stay broken. They start to believe that's who they are." Elon's throat tightened. There was a long pause, but not an awkward one. The kind of silence that happens when two people from opposite ends of the world understand each other without the need for more words. Nurzhan stood up, carefully packing away the remaining tools. He returned the small screwdriver set to its box, brushed away a speck of oil, and handed Elon a tiny folded note. From the back of the clock. "I think someone left it inside on purpose." Elon unfolded the paper. The handwriting was in Cyrillic, neat and aged. It was a single line, to remember that time doesn't stop, even when we do. He didn't know who had written it, maybe the original owner, maybe a repairman long forgotten. But it echoed in his chest with uncanny weight. That night, Elon left the office later than usual. As he passed down the hallway, he glanced back at the room. Through the glass door, he could still hear the ticking. He thought about everything Nurzhan had brought into his life in such a short span, a kind of silent courage, a loyalty unspoken, and a depth of perception that was far older than the boy's years. When he arrived at his apartment, he took off his jacket and set it aside. He stared at his reflection in the glass wall facing the ocean. He looked older than he remembered. Maybe it was the week, maybe the year. His phone buzzed. A photo. Nurzhan had sent it just minutes earlier. It was the repaired clock, the second hand framed perfectly mid-tick. Elon smiled, then typed back, "Looks better than new. Like you." 3 dots appeared for a moment. Then Nurzhan's reply came. "We're all just gears, right? We just need to be seen and aligned." Elon placed the phone down, stood in the middle of the room, and listened. Not to the sea, not to the wind, but to the quiet tick-tick-tick in his mind of something small, old, and almost forgotten beginning again. And this time not alone. The late afternoon sun bathed the SpaceX compound in gold, stretching long shadows across the arid terrain. The horizon shimmered with heat waves, and the buildings stood stoic like futuristic monoliths. Elon adjusted his pace to match Nurzhan's as they walked quietly, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Neither spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was pregnant with something unspoken, the kind of quiet that holds meaning before it finds its voice. They passed the solar arrays, rows of panels angled like soldiers facing the sky. Elon pointed toward a glass-fronted building nestled near the main compound. It looked modest compared to the Falcon assembly hangar, but it buzzed with quiet energy. Inside, technicians in white coats moved among 3D printers, laser cutters, and high-temperature furnaces. "That's our materials research lab," Elon finally said, nodding toward it. "Most people don't even realize how much we owe to the little things. Lighter alloys, new ceramics, composites that hold when everything else breaks. That's where real change begins." Nurzhan glanced at the building, his expression unreadable. Elon continued, "They're opening a spot for an apprentice. Someone to observe, assist, learn from the ground up. It's not glamorous. You'll make mistakes. You'll carry a lot of coffee. But if you want it, it's yours." Nurzhan stopped walking. He turned to Elon slowly, processing the words as if translating them first in his head and then in his heart. "Apprentice? Me?" Elon shrugged, his face open and sincere. "Why not you? I've watched how you work. You don't rush. You listen to the quiet things. Like time, like gears, like people. We need more of that. And it's not a favor, Nurzhan. You've already earned the right to try." Nurzhan opened his mouth, then closed it again. His fingers flexed slightly at his sides. Behind them, near the corner of a water station, Camilla leaned casually against the wall, watching from a distance. She wore her usual half-smile, the kind that said she saw more than she let on. When Nurzhan turned and met her gaze, she lifted her hand in a small wave and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Her message was clear. "Go ahead. You can." Nurzhan swallowed hard and turned back to Elon. His voice cracked a little, but his eyes held steady. "I try." Elon smiled, not the tight, polite kind people often saw in press releases, but something genuine. The kind that began in the chest and tugged upward. "Good," he said. "That's all it takes." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching a technician walk out of the lab carrying a glowing orange test plate with tongs. The heat shimmered like magic around it. Later that evening, Nurzhan sat in the corner of the cafeteria, still clutching the access badge Camilla had given him. It bore his name, Nurzhan A, in clean black font. A photograph too, slightly off-center, but unmistakably him. He ran his thumb over the plastic, unsure whether to smile or cry. Camilla joined him, dropping a small bag of trail mix onto the table. "You'll need energy," she said. "They work long hours in there." He looked at her. "You knew?" She raised an eyebrow. Elon doesn't just offer things on a whim. He sees potential, but he waits to see if you'll see it too. I just gave him a nudge. He looked down again, the weight of it all crashing gently over him, like a wave that didn't drown, just reminded you that the ocean was vast. "I don't know if I'm ready." "No one is," she replied, tearing open the bag. "You just show up. Every day. And one day, you look back and realize you've become the person you were trying to be." He looked at her again, deeply this time. "You talk like Elon." Camilla laughed. "I've worked here too long." The next morning, Nurzhan stepped through the glass doors of the lab, his badge clipped to a lanyard that felt far too official for someone who still felt like a guest. Inside, the air was cooler, humming with the steady rhythm of machines and minds. A woman with short gray hair handed him a pair of gloves and safety glasses without looking up. "Apprentice?" she asked. He nodded. "Bench 6. Don't touch anything red. Don't breathe on anything glowing. And if something starts to spark, call Marcus." It was chaos. But was his chaos now? Meanwhile, Elon stood by a window in his office, watching the lab from afar. He didn't micromanage, not this. There were places where the future couldn't be pushed. It had to be coaxed, allowed, grown from within. And what he had given Nurzhan wasn't a shortcut or a gift. It was space. A small patch of possibility in a desert of impossibilities. He turned away from the glass and looked at the old clock again. Still ticking, still alive. Sometimes you don't change the world by making bigger rockets. Sometimes you do it by giving someone a seat at the table, even when that person had once been a name on a faded telegram. A boy with nothing, a stranger with kind hands. Later that week, Camilla sent Elon a picture. It was of Nurzhan holding up his first completed project, a lightweight mounting frame for thermal tiles. It wasn't perfect, one edge was crooked, the holes misaligned. But the pride in his face, that was flawless. Elon responded with just one word: keep. The wind in Boca Chica had a peculiar way of announcing changes. It didn't roar or scream, it hummed. A low, steady hum that passed through the aluminum siding of SpaceX buildings, danced through the open spaces of the launch complex, and whispered through cracks in office windows. On that particular afternoon, it found its way into Elon's office, where rays of warm sun fell lazily across the desk cluttered with blueprints, cables, and digital models frozen mid-rotation on a screen. Nurzhan stood by the doorway, holding something in both hands. It was small, carefully balanced, and wrapped in a cloth so delicately folded it seemed ceremonial. His expression was unreadable, a mix of pride, shyness, and a hidden thread of nervous anticipation. Elon looked up from his tablet and removed his reading glasses. "What's this?" he asked, his voice curious but gentle. Nurzhan stepped forward and slowly unfolded the cloth. Inside was a paper sculpture. It wasn't flashy or intricate in the way that origami dragons or cranes might be. It was simple, a rectangular package with soft folds and precise creases, shaped to resemble something you might receive in the mail, or perhaps a small gift from a stranger. The paper had been shaded by hand, the colors warm and earthy, blending brown, amber, and cream tones like sun-drenched parchment. At the base, mounted on a small, dark pedestal carved from a spare piece of Falcon 9 insulation foam, was a handwritten label: "From Sky to Heart." Elon blinked once, then again. He leaned in. The craftsmanship wasn't professional. Some corners didn't align perfectly. The ink in the label smudged slightly, as if the writer's hands had trembled. But it didn't matter. The meaning landed harder than perfection ever could. "What is it?" he asked softly. Nurzhan hesitated, then spoke in his slow, careful English. "Is package, but not real. It mean things from sky." He tapped his own chest. "Some crash, some help. But this one, this go here." He pointed to Elon's heart. Elon looked down at the sculpture again. The message settled into him like sediment in water, spreading slowly, rearranging things inside. "From sky to heart," he repeated, almost to himself. "You made this?" Nurzhan nodded. "I try. Paper from blueprint room, foam from broken panel, pen from Camilla desk." He smiled faintly, his face flushed with the kind of joy that has nothing to prove. Elon ran his hand across the sculpture's edges, then gently picked it up and placed it right in the center of his desk. Not off to the side, not next to the awards. Center. He leaned back, arms crossed, and let out a deep, thoughtful breath. "You know," he said, "life drops things from the sky all the time. Some useful, some absolutely ridiculous. Satellite debris, frozen frogs, half-burnt love letters. I've read about a guy in Florida who once got hit by a pineapple from an airplane trash chute." Nurzhan chuckled, unsure whether to believe that last part. "But sometimes," Elon continued, "in the middle of all that absurdity, you catch something that sticks, that reminds you what matters." Their eyes met across the desk, and for a long second, there was nothing but shared silence, an unspoken understanding built over months of shared glances, short words, and small acts. Nurzhan pulled out a folded napkin for his pocket. "Also, Camilla helped with word." Elon laughed. "I figured. You don't usually misspell sky." Nurzhan turned red. "It first say from sky to hearth. Camilla say maybe no." That broke the tension, and they both laughed until their sides ached. The kind of laughter that comes not from a punchline, but from having survived something together. From knowing you've traveled a strange road and still made it to the same place. When they calmed down, Elon looked at the sculpture again. "This might be the most important thing on my desk." Nurzhan tilted his head. "Even more than Mars plan?" "Yes," Elon replied, smiling. "Because this one doesn't just reach planets, it reaches people." For the rest of the afternoon, the office took on a different air. The engineers came, and went, tossing jargon back and forth about polymers and test cycles, unaware that something small and silent had taken root in the middle of their leader's table. Camila passed by once, catching a glimpse of the sculpture. She gave Nurzhan a wink and mouth. Nice. Outside, rockets were being prepped, simulations calculated, and launch windows narrowed. But inside, time slowed. Elon found himself glancing at the sculpture between emails, catching its folded edges from the corner of his eye like the way you watch a candle flicker in a quiet room. Later that evening, long after the building had emptied, Elon stayed behind. He didn't feel like working. Instead, he poured himself tea and sat at the desk, staring at the paper package. He thought about Nurzhan's journey, from the moment they met on the sidewalk, through the long silences, the lake, the clock, the offer at the lab, and now this. He thought about how easy it was to overlook the fragile things, how often he buried himself in metrics, speed, efficiency. But this was slow. It was handmade. It was not scalable, nor repeatable, nor automatable. And that made it sacred. From sky to heart. He whispered the phrase one last time before turning off the light. And in the darkness of the room, the sculpture remained. A small, imperfect package. A reminder that even in the age of rockets, sometimes the most meaningful deliveries come without noise, without heat, and without trajectory, falling gently and landing right where they're needed most. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Elon noticed the difference. Nurzhan now walked the halls of SpaceX with a steady rhythm, not rushed, not hesitant, but like someone who belonged. He laughed a little louder, stayed longer in meetings, and spoke with a confidence that hadn't been there before. His English had improved not just through lessons, but through living, through jokes half told and explained again, through late-night troubleshooting in the engineering bay, through coffee breaks where words didn't need perfect grammar, just intent. And Elon had changed too in subtler ways. He still talked about rockets and orbits and megaton payloads. Still dreamed of Mars, of course. But now he also talked about desert sunsets, about how silence can say more than algorithms, and how the tiniest human gestures, a repaired clock, a folded paper gift, had a strange way of realigning his own internal mechanisms. There was a new rhythm to his days. Camila noticed it first. "You don't answer emails after 8 anymore," she teased once. Elon just smiled. Some parts of him were still learning how to slow down. But he was learning. Then came the conference in San Diego. It was a full house, CEOs, engineers, students, skeptics. Elon took the stage in his usual black shirt and casual stance, but there was something softer in his posture. Less armor. He gave a talk about resilience in innovation, about how failure teaches better than success, and how the smallest anomalies often lead to the biggest breakthroughs. Then a woman in the audience stood up for the candid. "Mr. Musk," she said, "with everything you've done, Tesla, Mars, AI, all of it, what's the most unbelievable event you've experienced personally?" The room stilled. Elon paused. And then, with perfect seriousness, he said, "A package of drugs fell from the sky. It killed a woman. And it brought her fiancé here to work with me." Literally. A wave of laughter rippled through the audience. Some people clapped. Others looked around, waiting for a punchline. But Elon didn't smile. Because it was true. He had replayed it many times, the absurdity, the tragedy, the randomness. But also what came after. The transformation, the connection, the healing, quiet and real. Nurzhan was more than a promising engineer. He was proof of something Elon hadn't known he was looking for, that not all answers come from formulas. Some come from sitting beside someone who doesn't speak your language, yet still understands everything that matters. That night, back in Boca Chica, Elon returned to his office alone. The origami sculpture still sat on his desk. From sky to heart, it read, slightly smudged from where Elon had wiped dust off the base a few days earlier. He picked it up and turned it in his hands. A paper package, symbol of chaos, of loss, of unexpected grace. He thought of Rosa back in Kazakhstan, tending her plants, sipping her tea, never needing recognition to know she had done something good. He thought of Camila, how she had seen Nurzhan before anyone else had, and kept him steady through each strange new day. He thought of Nurzhan himself, now laughing with colleagues, making prototypes, solving equations. Still quiet, still carrying grief. But with space now, space to grow into something new. Elon walked to the window. Below, the test platform shimmered with spotlights. A team was preparing for a late-night ignition trial. Nurzhan was down there too, holding a clipboard, double-checking readings. Focused, present. You okay? Camila's voice came through the open door. He turned. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, smiling. Yeah, Elon said. Better than okay. She raised an eyebrow. You gonna tell the rest of the world what that means? Maybe, he replied. Or maybe I'll just let them wonder. They stood there for a while watching the team below. Rockets and people, timelines and trauma, science and stories, all tangled together in the strangest harmony. Later, when the engines roared and the platform trembled, Elon didn't flinch. He watched the fire with awe, as always. But he also watched Nurzhan. Because sometimes the most important liftoff doesn't make a sound. It happens quietly over months, through tears and effort, and people showing up for each other without needing to be asked. It doesn't break the atmosphere. It simply rewrites your definition of what's possible. And in the end, that's what mattered. Not the trajectory of a ship, but the course correction of a soul. If you've made it this far in the story, I want to ask you something different. Not just like and subscribe. Instead, tell us where you're watching from, yes, but also, what part of this story stayed with you? What detail, what line, what emotion? Your comment might be the paper package someone else needs to open today.